Something that smells weird to me is they keep saying, well, we don't want to release the 911 call because it could mess up the investigation. We've heard that in many places, including Chicago with Laquan McDonald and other places, that it's for the sanctity of the investigation. Well, I have a feeling that if that 911 call gave her sympathy or lended some credence to whatever defense theory, that would have been out by now. So basically, they're asking the public and Botham's family and activists on the ground to basically trust them, that they're doing. Renee Hall, the district attorney, said, trust me, we're taking our time meticulously to get, we don't want to rush this to a grand jury, but how do you trust them when there is not even a little bit of transparency as front of that? And if you don't want to give the 911 call, at least her police records and the information about that shooting a year ago.
Well, and there are several things to unpack there. The DA is not actually saying that it would disrupt the investigation. They're saying that the release of the information could create a bias in the public that would prevent an impartial jury from being seated and would require them to move the case to a different county. And they cited a specific Texas Court of Appeals case, which is not what you ought to do with me if you don't anticipate me reading it. And when it says the exact opposite of what they're saying, I find that explanation laughable.
You're a politician that actually does his homework and reads documents. We don't get that often.
I am a lawyer also, and I love a good legal fight. So don't cite me a case you don't want read. And the one they cited said it is only in the rarest of circumstances that pretrial publicity can prevent the impaneling of an impartial jury, because pretrial publicity doesn't create bias. It's false reporting that creates bias. By being more transparent, you prevent false reporting more than you encourage it. And so it's just a bogus explanation. But the other point you bring up is her work records. Her representatives have made it a point very early in this process to claim that she was an overworked police officer returning from a 15-hour shift. Well, why not release the records that prove that that was a 15-hour shift? That seems, I mean, she's being allowed to use this information as both sword and shield. Sword to say, I'm an overworked cop, I'm building my public sort of defense of my actions, and then a shield to say, ongoing investigation, you can't see the records that would prove what I'm claiming.
And also, they fired her, I believe, 3 weeks after this happened. I mean, from everything I could tell, they didn't really present a rationale other than, some vague broke code of conduct or something like that. So we don't know exactly the reasons they fired her other than public pressure. Do they know something from the investigation? It's all kind of a guessing game.
Well, and this has been consistent with the behavior of DPD Command and the DA the entire time. They make initial pronouncements, and then, we public figures rely on those. And this is how the mayor got so upset with me, I think, is because the chief kept telling him things in the first few days. He would make a pronouncement in reliance on what she said, and then she would change her position. And I sympathize. That's frustrating. But what happened with the personnel action, the termination, was that generally you have an administrative investigation that goes on in parallel with the criminal investigation when there's an officer-involved shooting. The administrative investigation is to satisfy the officer's due process rights under our civil service rules. And what the police chief and the DA both said was that they thought that the administrative investigation could potentially bias the criminal investigation or interfere with it because they were specifically worried that information from the administrative investigation would leak. So they essentially said, we don't trust our own internal investigators to keep confidential information confidential. Therefore, we're not going to engage in the administrative investigation. We're going to keep it stopped and come back to it later once the criminal investigation is done. And therefore, without that administrative investigation, we can't fire her. Well, that apparently changed over the course of a weekend at one point, right before they fired her. And the chief's only subsequent explanation was that they were able to complete the administrative investigation.
Yeah, the whole thing kind of seems like one hand doesn't know what the other one is doing, but
it seems like they're caving to public pressure. It doesn't seem like any of these explanations are valid. For one thing, there are too many explanations for the same thing, and that's like if you have like a 5-year-old who's trying to figure out how to not tell the truth, you get 3 stories when one would do. I mean, that's the story of this case. Everybody's got so many explanations.
And I mean, let's just keep it real. Do you think if this was an off-duty black police officer who went to the wrong apartment and shot a white female dead, that this would have been the same response?
Oh my goodness! Now that is a very interesting question, because that sets 2 cultural problems against each other. One is this special treatment being given to police the more likely violation of the rule of law, or is the unfair treatment of African Americans when they harm white people, is that a stronger cultural bias? And I don't think I know. Either way, both bad.
Absolutely. And, you look bigger picture. Obviously, this is Dallas, but in the last decade, we've had Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. I could go on and on.
Jordan Edwards locally. I mean, we can make our own local list, which is really not anything we want to see. And Austin's police department just determined that they have the highest rate of shooting of unarmed mentally ill people of any major city. I think cities all over are coming to grips with this. And the tragedy with the way this has been handled is that Renee Hall, in her short tenure as the police chief, has shown a strong willingness to engage in reforms that could really fix some of these problems. And I hope that this doesn't damage her credibility so much that those efforts are stalled.